A long time. The alcohol had lowered my inhibitions, and in that reckless state, I crossed a line I could never undo. The next morning, I woke with a pounding headache and a sinking feeling in my chest. Reality crashed over me like a tidal wave as fragmented memories of the night before resurfaced. Guilt clawed at my insides, and I knew that I had made the worst mistake of my life. Returning home that morning after my betrayal felt like stepping into a surreal nightmare. The exhaustion I felt wasn't just physical. It came from the crushing realization that I had altered the course of my life irreversibly. The apartment that Michael and I had once shared, once filled with warmth and laughter, felt unfamiliar and hollow, as if it belonged to someone else. His presence lingered only in my memories, while the physical reminders of him, his neatly hung clothes, the comforting scent of his toiletries, and the photographs that once documented our happiest moments, were gone. I stood frozen in the doorway, gripping my bag as though it could tether me to reality. Every step inside felt like an intrusion into a life I had destroyed with my own hands. Writing this now feels like confessing to an unforgivable sin, perhaps because it is exactly that. I know that those reading my story will judge me harshly, and I don't expect sympathy. I don't deserve it. The weight of shame presses heavily on my shoulders for having shattered the life Michael and I had built together, and I accept full responsibility for my actions. At my counselor's urging, I've chosen to document my thoughts rather than bury them. Dr. Sarah believes that confronting my choices instead of avoiding them is the only way forward. And so, I lay bare my soul, unraveling the story of how everything fell apart. Michael and I had spent 3 wonderful years together, years filled with love, laughter, and companionship. We were just days away from our wedding. The venue was set, the flowers had been arranged, and every detail meticulously planned. Everything was moving so fast, and somewhere along the way, I lost sight of myself. Whether it was the pressure, the fear of commitment, or some hidden self-destructive tendency, I can't say for sure. But instead of celebrating our love, I made the worst decision of my life. Michael was unlike anyone I had ever met. He was my rock, the steady force in my otherwise chaotic world, always grounding me when I felt lost. I can still picture the day we met, St. Patrick's Day, at a crowded pub filled with people in green. He stood out, the only one not dressed for the occasion. With a mischievous grin, he approached me, pulled a tiny bag of candy from his pocket, and said, "Here's your pot of gold, leprechaun." I laughed, and from that moment on, we were inseparable. His love made me feel truly seen, flaws and all. But maybe deep down, I never believed I was worthy of it. Maybe that doubt was what set everything into motion. As the wedding drew closer, the excitement I should have felt was replaced by a suffocating sense of anxiety. The relentless planning, family dynamics, and overwhelming need for perfection consumed me. Michael remained calm and patient through it all, unfazed by the chaos. He reassured me when I fretted over seating charts and florals, his only request being simple: no extravagant bachelor or bachelorette parties, and he wanted to wear a classic tuxedo. But instead of leaning on him, I withdrew. I bottled up my emotions, convincing myself that I needed one last moment of freedom before marriage, a desperate and misguided attempt to escape the pressure I felt closing in on me. That's when I made the impulsive decision to have a bachelorette party, knowing full well it was against Michael's wishes. What started as an innocent night out with friends, drinks, laughter, reminiscing, quickly spiraled into something else entirely. As the alcohol flowed, so did my judgment. By the time we ended up at a friend's apartment, things had already gone too far. A hired stripper was meant to be nothing more than entertainment, a harmless indulgence. But under the haze of intoxication, I let myself be swept away by a reckless thrill. I flirted. I crossed lines I never should have. And then, I did something I can never take back. The weight of my betrayal crushes me even now, knowing that a single night of selfish indulgence destroyed the most important thing in my life. And Michael, he never deserved this. Somehow, I ended up in his bed. The events of that night blurred into a distant haze, as if I were merely a bystander watching someone else's life unfold. But when morning arrived, reality struck with an unforgiving force. A pounding headache and an overwhelming sense of dread accompanied my awakening. Still disoriented, my hand instinctively reached out, expecting to find Michael beside me. But as my fingers brushed against unfamiliar sheets and I turned my head, I was met with a horrifying sight. The stripper. Panic erupted within me. I scrambled to gather my clothes, my hands trembling as I struggled to comprehend what I had done. Every fiber of my being wanted to believe that this was nothing more than a nightmare, that if I remained silent, I could somehow erase the truth. But deep down, I knew better. I had crossed a line that could never be redrawn. The weight of guilt pressed down on me, suffocating and inescapable. The thought of facing Michael felt unbearable. As I neared our apartment, a suffocating sense of unease settled in my chest. Even before I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air felt heavy, charged with an eerie stillness that made my stomach twist. And then I saw it, his belongings gone. The closet that once held his clothes now stood empty. His books, his scent, every trace of him had vanished. The photographs that once lined our shelves, capturing moments of pure happiness, were nowhere to be found. My heart pounded wildly as I moved from room to room, desperately searching for some sign that this was a mistake. But the more I looked, the clearer the truth became. Michael had left. On the kitchen counter, a single note remained. Just 4 devastating words. Hope it was worth it. I stared at the note, my vision blurring as tears streamed down my face. It felt as though I had been struck, the breath knocked from my lungs. My hands trembled as I clutched the paper, my mind reeling in disbelief. This couldn't be real. I had held on to the desperate hope that I would have a chance to explain, to apologize, to plead for forgiveness. But Michael had made his decision, and I understood why. Every attempt to contact him was met with silence. My calls went straight to voicemail. My texts remained unsent. He had blocked me on everything. It was as if I had been erased from his life entirely, as if the years we had spent together had never existed. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching his note as uncontrollable sobs racked my body. I had destroyed the most precious thing in my life, and there was no undoing it. In the days that followed, I withdrew from the world. I stopped eating, barely slept, and ignored every call from concerned friends. The weight of my own shame was unbearable. How could I possibly explain what I had done? How could I justify betraying the man who had loved me unconditionally, just days before we were supposed to exchange vows? Regret consumed me, replaying that night in my mind on an endless loop. No matter how many times I wished I could turn back time, I knew the truth. The damage was permanent. Weeks blurred into months, and I tried to rebuild the fragments of my life. But every morning, I awoke to the same crushing guilt, the emptiness of our apartment a constant reminder of my destruction. There was no escape, no relief, only the relentless ache of loss. Desperate for any connection to Michael, I reached out to his best friend, Chris. Maybe, just maybe, he could offer a sliver of hope. But his response was cold and final. Michael doesn't want to hear from you. Stay away. And that was when it truly sank in. Michael had moved on. He had severed every tie, ensuring that I could never reach him again. The realization settled over me like a weight too heavy to bear. Eventually, I sought therapy. Dr. Sarah encouraged me to write about my experience, believing that confronting my actions would help me make sense of them. At first, I resisted. I didn't want to face the truth, didn't want to acknowledge the pattern that had existed long before Michael. Because this wasn't just about one night. It was about a lifetime of self-sabotage. For as long as I could remember, I had ruined the good things in my life. Every time happiness was within reach, I found a way to push it away. And Michael, he had been the greatest gift I had ever received. But instead of cherishing him, I had destroyed everything we had built. Understanding my behavior didn't make it easier to live with, but I was learning. 3 years have passed since that night, and I am still navigating the path towards self-forgiveness. I may never fully get there, but I have learned to coexist with my mistakes, to accept that I cannot rewrite the past, only move forward. I no longer search for Michael. He has moved on, and I truly hope he has found the happiness he deserves. As for me, I continue my journey, one step at a time.